ask just for a minute to read this? I'll give them right back.
Hello, everybody. This is the greatest thing. Look at all of us here. This is great. I'm so excited. This is our first spoken word event, our first actual event. So you're the first. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks to you for coming to our first indoor performance. Please enjoy a journey back to the 19th century and silence your cell phones. The exits are there and there. Many thanks to Chris Rosen, Michael Cirilli, and Corey Allen for the lights, sound, and video of tonight's show, and for general troubleshooting and technical support. There will be an intermission, and we hope you will enjoy the refreshments. And now, please welcome to the stage, Mr. Paul Savior.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to take a brief journey through the life of Edgar Allan Poe. I don't know if I turned my mic on. Did I?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. If you can't hear me, go like this. If I'm too loud, go like that. I'm going to take a brief journey through the life of Edgar Allan Poe by way of some of his better known poems. We thought that it was appropriate since Halloween is just around the corner. I understand that it's between the ages of 12 and 15 that a lot of boys get hooked on the scary and the creepy works of Poe. That surely was the case with me. And since my teens, I'd say that I've probably read everything that the man ever wrote. So tonight is a real pleasure for me. Most of the world remembers Poe as a poet and as a storyteller. But he was also an essayist, a critic, an editor, as well as, see, mic is off.
Your voice doesn't need a mic. It doesn't.
Now you're going to really hear me. Let me go back a space here. Most of the world remembers him as a poet and storyteller, but he was also an essayist, an editor, a critic, as well as the inventor of the detective mystery story, and the innovator of what's called science fiction today. His numerous tales of horror and terror defined Poe, in the words of the famous author D.H. Lawrence, as, and I quote, an adventurer into the vaults and cellars and horrible underground passages of the human soul. In addition, he's known as the classic American Romanticist, which of course meant the content and the topics of the material that people wrote about in those days, but it also refers to a style of writing and the expression of thoughts which was very elaborate, often extremely florid during those years. It certainly was the flavor of the times. Today it's what we call old-fashioned. Well, I'll ask you to try to get past that feeling. Listen to the magic created by one of the greatest craftsmen of the English language. For a bit of perspective as to why the phrase "a mournful and never-ending remembrance" is ascribed to Poe, let me give you a snapshot of his life. He was born in 1809 in Boston. Our country was only 33 years old. Life was hard, to say the least. And most importantly, the problem of tuberculosis plagued the whole population. Poe's mother was an accomplished actress with 300 plays to her credit. She started when she was like 8 or 9 years old and was already talented. She bore 3 children, and she died of tuberculosis by the age of 24. Yeah. Poe's father died just a few weeks later. So, an orphan at 2½, Edgar started upon a life of losses and disappointments in personal relationships with those that he loved and cared for, either romantically or platonically, who either died or dissolved their relationship with him. Add to that economic instability bordering on abject poverty haunted him through his entire life. And yet, glimpses of brilliance showed very early in his life. In school, he was an exemplary student, mainly proficient in literature and languages. He was writing satires in Latin when he was 9 and already showed an interest in poetry. Before he entered the University of Virginia at 16, he met and fell in love with a young girl, Elmira Royster, and then they became unofficially engaged. Now, during that first year, he excelled in modern and ancient languages, French, Italian, Latin, Greek. While at university, he wrote to his intended, Elmira, very frequently. However, her father didn't approve of Edgar, so he intercepted all the letters that were written between these two young people, and he burned them. Consequently, both of these young folks thought that the other was no longer interested. And when Edgar came home from university, he went to visit Elmira, only to walk in on a party celebrating her engagement to someone that her father had chosen for her. A major blow to the ego, huge disappointment, and a sense of hopelessness. It was a humiliating loss. And that, with the endless financial stresses and the worsening friction with his miserly stepfather that he had, he left home at 18 and took off to the city of his birth, Boston. Homeless and penniless. Stayed with a friend, began to write poetry. That brings us to his first important poem, The Lake. The title refers to a location outside Norfolk, Virginia, known as the Lake of the Dismal Swamp. There was a legend about 2 young lovers that when the girl died suddenly, the young man began to actually lose his mind. He refused to believe that she was dead, and he went searching for her in the Lake of the Dismal Swamp. And he was never seen or heard from again. The legend continued that the couple still haunt this lake. Poe knew this legend. He had visited the site repeatedly at sunset when it was extra spooky. And obviously he identified with this distraught young man. And as we shall see, this poem starts Edgar off on a lifelong obsession with the death of young, beautiful women. Also, as a setting, lakes often play a role in Poe's works. P.S. The lake was rumored to be poisonous on top of it all. So, let's go jump in the lake, shall we? In spring of youth, it was my lot to haunt of the wide world a spot the which I could not love the less. So lovely was the loneliness of a wild lake with black rock bound and the tall pines that towered around. But when the night had thrown her pall upon that spot, as upon all, and the mystic wind went by, murmuring in melody, then I would awake to the terror of the lone lake. Yet that terror was not fright, but a tremulous delight and a feeling undefined, springing from a darkened mind. Death was in that poisonous wave, and in its gulf a fitting grave for him who thence could solace bring to his dark imagining, whose solitary soul could make an Eden of that dim lake. So you can see, despite the sorrowful loss, Edgar was drawn to the lake with a tremulous delight. He felt solace, even made an Eden out of it. This must have been because, as the young man in the legend, he imagined that he could find this lost love and spend eternity with her in paradise. The next piece is called Romance, written when he was 20. That first one was written when he was 18 and a half. This reveals one of Poe's other fascinations, and that's the huge paradox we experience as we move through life. It's comprised of 2 stanzas. Now, this is getting complicated here. In the first stanza, he declares his dedication to romance, which he views as the truth. It's in the voice of nature through the sounds made by a bird, a parakeet, reflected in a shady lake, there's the lake again, when he was just an innocent boy. Then in the second stanza, he laments the assault of torturous time in the image of a rapacious condor, which denies us the freedom of our youth. So we go from dreamy youth to careworn later life. Oh, and there's a painted parakeet. Refers to a Scottish story of a wooden sculpture of a bird which was often on top of a building and was regarded as the target at which an archer aims to achieve his goals. In Poe's case, that was the pursuit of poetry and art. But there was no time for them. They're forbidden things. Whew. That's a whole bunch of imagery and metaphors in just 21 lines. And incidentally, the original and actual meaning of the word romance is fiction, or a story, which of course Poe knew, but he liked to call it the truth. So fiction was the truth for him. He really enjoyed contradictions, used a lot of them in his work. This is Romance. Romance, who loved to nod and sing with drowsy head and folded wing among the green leaves as they shake far down within some shadowy lake. To me, a painted paroquet hath been, a most familiar bird, taught me my alphabet to say, to lisp my very earliest word, while in the wild wood I did lie, a child with a most knowing eye. Of late, eternal condor years so shake the very heaven on high with tumult as they thunder by. I have no time for idle cares through gazing on the unquiet sky. And when an hour with calmer wings its down upon my spirit flings, that little time with lyre and rhyme to while away forbidden things, my heart would feel to be a crime unless it trembled with those strings. The trembling of strings is a musical metaphor for writing poetry. It's as if poetry is playing a musical instrument. But we don't get to do it because there's too much pressure in life. We know about that one. Edgar was just 20 when he published this next poem, and he published it at his own expense. He had hardly enough money for his lodging. It's entitled Alone. It's considered one of his finest early works. From childhood's hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone, and all I loved I loved alone. Then, in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery that binds me still. From the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm and the cloud that took the form when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view. There's another short poem from the early pre-1829 period that I feel is worth mentioning. It was written and entitled to a publisher, Isaac Lee. Poe was searching for anybody to accept some of his works for publication. It's just 4 lines in which he reveals his passion for poetry, in that by some unknown force he adopted the cause, that's poetry, and he's married to it, for better or worse. The last 2 lines come from the heart. It was my choice, or chance, or curse, to adopt the cause, for better or worse, and with my worldly goods, and wit, and soul, and body, worship it. Beautifully minimal arrangement of words defines Poe's reason for being, his raison d'être. He has to be a poet. He has no option. P.S. Isaac Lee rejected the poems that he brought in. The next series of 3 works was written, published in 1831 at the age of 22. On the light side, I'll start with To Helen, since it is, and I quote, often regarded as the finest of Poe's lyrics. Again, this period was the peak of Romanticism, and as a young man, Poe was deeply influenced by Lord Byron, Keats, and Shelley, and the others of the time. And his excessively florid use of the language, especially when beauty or love were the topics, was the flavor of the day. So much has been written about To Helen that I picked this following quote. It is based on a personal experience, but also has a universal meaning. To wit, it is spiritual love that leads us to beauty. And beauty is the homeland of all that is sacred in our being. Beauty is the lasting legacy of Greece and Rome. And it is the supreme symbol of beauty, Helen, daughter of Zeus, who brings the wanderer home and inspires the poet. As Poe said of poetry, it's the rhythmical creation of beauty with words. Now here's a few notes. I'm not quoting any of the poems that had a lot of allusions to mythology and literature that we wouldn't know what that's all about. So I will mention a few words that you may not know. A bark, you may know, is a large boat, wooden boat, like a large canoe. Nicean refers to Nike, goddess of victory. Naiads are freshwater nymphs, not of the sea. And in Greek, Psyche represents the soul. This is To Helen. Helen, thy beauty is to me like those Nicean barks of yore, that gently o'er a perfumed sea the weary, wayworn wanderer bore to his own native shore. On desperate seas, long wont to roam, thy hyacinth hair, thy classic face, thy naiad airs have brought me home to the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome. Lo, in yon brilliant window niche, how statue-like I see thee stand. the agate lamp within thy hand. Ah, Psyche, from the regions which are Holy Land. Psyche is the soul. On the darker side of this series, we have The City in the Sea, which refers to the Dead Sea. Legends about the ruins of cities sunken in the Dead Sea were a favorite theme for poets and writers of this time. It's believed that this city that he's writing about is Gomorrah, which, as we know, with Sodom, was destroyed because of its rampant indulgence in sin. Legend further has it that during dry periods, the Dead Sea recedes, and the tops of walls and columns of the ruined cities can be seen above the water. I don't know if that's a fact, but it's a legend. And as the sea is in earthquake country, the poem prophesies that someday an earthquake will tumble down those ruins which are standing within the sea. So this is the city in the sea. Lo, death has reared itself a throne in a strange city lying alone far down within the dim west, where the good and the bad and the worst and the best have gone to their eternal rest. There, shrines and palaces and towers, time-eaten towers that tremble not, resemble nothing that is ours. Around, by lifting winds forgot, resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie. No rays from the holy heaven come down on the long night time of that town, but light from out the lurid sea streams up the turrets silently, gleams up the pinnacles far and free, up domes, up spires, up kingly halls, up fanes, up Babylon-like walls, up shadowy, long-forgotten bowers of sculptured ivory and stone flowers, up many and many a marvelous shrine whose wreathed friezes intertwine the vial, the violet, and the vine. Resignedly, beneath the sky the melancholy waters lie. So blend the turrets and shadows there that all seem pendulous in air, while from a proud tower in the town, death looks gigantically down. There, open fanes and gaping graves yawn level with the luminous waves, but not the riches that there lie in each idol's diamond eye, not the gaily jeweled dead tempt the waters from their bed, for no ripple curls, alas, along that wilderness of glass. No swellings tell that winds may be upon some far-off happier sea. No heavings hint that winds have been on seas less hideously serene, but lo, a stir is in the air. The wave, there is a movement there, as if the towers had thrust aside in slightly sinking the dull tide, as if their tops had feebly given a void within the filmy heaven. The waves have now a redder glow. The hours are breathing faint and low. And when, amid no earthly moans, down, down, that town shall settle hence, hell, rising from 1,000 thrones, shall do it reverence. Now to lighten up a bit, we have One in Paradise. This was written in 1833 at the age of 24. Think of our 24-year-olds today. And it's also considered one of Poe's more important works. To again quote the scholar, it is among the most musical of his rare love poems. And it has yet, he couldn't help himself, a sense of irremediable loss. The closing stanza is perfection of melody. So this is a love poem. Thou wast that all to me, love, for which my soul did pine. A green isle in the sea, love, a fountain and a shrine, all wreathed with fairy fruits and flowers, and all the flowers were mine. Ah, dream too bright to last. Ah, starry hope, thou didst arise but to be overcast. A voice from out the future cries, on, but o'er the past dim gulf my spirit hovering lies, mute, motionless, aghast. And all my days are trances, and all my nightly dreams are where thy gray eye glances, and where thy footstep gleams, in what ethereal dances, by what eternal streams. Pretty. Now we go to the dark side again. I try to mix it up. We have the Conqueror Worm. This is a popular one among young boys. I just was crazy about this when I was 12 years old. This was first published in January of 1843. Poe was 34, so we've jumped ahead a few years. It's another major poem, and it is, quote, unsurpassed in its power and pessimism. Just the year before, his wife, Virginia, burst a blood vessel while she was singing. She remained in very poor health until she died 5 years later. Poe was very ill for a long while as well, and he suffered a number of employment losses, let's call them. It was a dark time for Edgar. This is the Conqueror Worm. Lo, 'tis a gala night, within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng, bewinged, bedight in veils, and drowned in tears, sit in a theater to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets they, who come and go at bidding of vast, formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings invisible woe. That motley drama, to be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd through a circle that ever returneth into the selfsame spot, and much of madness and more of sin and horror, the soul of the plot. But see, amid the mimic rout, a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes, with mortal pangs the mimes become its food, and seraphs sob at vermin fangs in human gore imbued. Out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form, the curtain, a funeral pall, comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy man, and its hero, the Conqueror Worm. And yet one more view from the dark side is Dreamland. This is one of my very favorite poems. It explores another one of Poe's obsessions, fascinations, the mysterious landscape of dreams. Along with The Raven, this is one of Poe's most famous poems. It includes perhaps his most quoted line, out of space, out of time. It's a vivid, haunting description of the world of dreams, where all of us meet phantoms of the real, of the unreal, of the dead, of the living. We have the absence of true color. Lilies are white, woods are gray, and as in many dreams, sleepers don't have any colors. The speaker is a traumatized survivor from a terrifying journey where dreams are a path to memory, and through it, to a past that is literally buried. It leads us invariably to specters, forms of friends long given in agony to earth and to heaven. And here's a few notes. An eidolon, in the first little stanza, is a phantom. Thule was a Greek word, named for an island that was far off above Scandinavia somewhere, where everything is strange and different. You probably remember the expression way back in the Tules, that was somewhere in the Tules. That means it's really far away. That's where dreams are. Titans were huge predecessors of the Olympian gods, and we see through a glass darkly comes from the Bible. Poe wrote many one-liner ironic lines. This one, the scariest monsters are those that lurk within our souls. This is Dreamland. By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only, where an eidolon named Night on a black throne reigns upright. I have reached these lands but newly, from an ultimate dim Thule, from a wild, weird clime that lieth sublime, out of space, out of time. Bottomless vales, boundless floods, and chasms and caves in Titan woods, with forms that no man can discover for the tears that drip all over. Mountains toppling evermore into seas without a shore, seas that restlessly aspire, surging unto skies of fire, lakes that endlessly outspread their lone waters, lone and dead, their still waters, still and chilly, with the snows of the lolling lily. By the lakes that thus outspread their lone waters, lone and dead, their sad waters, sad and chilly, with the snows of the lolling lily, by the mountains, near the river, murmuring lowly, murmuring ever, by the gray woods, by the swamp, where the toad and the newt encamp, by the dismal tarns and pools, where dwell the ghouls, by each spot, the most unholy, in each nook most melancholy, there the traveler meets aghast, sheeted memories of the past, shrouded forms that start and sigh as they pass the wanderer by, white-robed forms of friends long given in agony to the earth and heaven. For the heart whose woes are legion, 'tis a peaceful, soothing region. For the spirit that walks in shadow, 'tis a El Dorado. But the traveler traveling through it may not, dare not openly view it. Never its mysteries are exposed to the weak human eye unclosed. So wills its king, who hath forbid the uplifting of the fringed lid. And thus the sad soul that here passes beholds it through darkened glasses. By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only, where an eidolon named Night on a black throne reigns upright, I have wandered home but newly from this ultimate dim Thule. And on that unhappy note, why don't we have some refreshments? And when we come back, we'll have a visit from the Raven. Oh yeah, that guy.
donation jars. Donations are what we're running on right now. We really appreciate them. They're greatly needed. We keep ticket prices low so more people can come and discover us. And we count on your donations to make that possible. And also, we do count on you to spread the word about us. If you had a good time, please tell people that we're here. And we're open to suggestions. We're developing. We can go in many directions. So keep us in mind. Spread the word. Let's get this thing going and have it be a real force in the valley. Okay? Thank you. Please sign it on your way out. We definitely need to have your email and whatever. And consider volunteering with us. We would appreciate it as well. And back to our show.
I talked to the guy who had it said.
As I said, we're going to start with The Raven. And this is Poe's most famous composition. A quote of the day claimed by a major publisher, editor, that, quote, "No great poem ever established itself so immediately, so widely, and so imperishably in men's minds." It was published first in 1844. Poe kept on refining it, tweaking it. He did that with a lot of poems. He found that there were things that he'd like to do a little better, take a phrase out, put a word in. And he did that for 5 years until his death in 1849. Not many people know. He died at 40. He had some problems, but I haven't talked about them. Alcohol was one of them. He's known supposedly for drug abuse. No such thing. There were sedatives at the time that people took freely. Maybe they were addictive, I don't know. But generally speaking, he was free of drugs. Alcohol was a problem. He was allergic to alcohol. He got very sick on alcohol. Now, some scholars believe that the heroine of this poem is almost surely an imaginary person, since Poe was concerned, as I mentioned before, from his very youth, with the death of beautiful ladies. As a matter of fact, he once said, "The death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetic topic in the world." Writers, however, generally agree that his wife, Virginia, was the prototype for Lenore in this poem. He was 26 when he married Virginia. She was 14. And they had lived together with his aunt in the same home for several years, and he called her Sissy because she was like his little sister. And they just adored each other. And she was his first cousin on top of it. Okay. Curiously, he often used a substitute name for the woman about whom he might have been writing. His wife's death was an incredible, emotionally disastrous blow to Edgar. The poem is about the narrator's loss of love, Lenore, but even more so, the poem is about his obsession with the chance that she might come back from the dead. In the first stanza of the poem, he says, "Volumes of forgotten lore." Probably refers to metaphysical books of the time, books on theories of reincarnation. That was very popular back then. A couple of notes. Nepenthe, he talks about, was a drink devised by the gods to assuage grief, to bring peace to a troubled mind. You may know quaff means to drink. Balm in Gilead is relief from pain. And Aden is another form of Eden, or paradise. Here's the raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, nothing more." But distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token. And the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Well, back into my chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Well, and this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," said I, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven from the night's Plutonian shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is from the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Well, much I marveled, this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word. As if his soul in that one word he did outpour, nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and boston door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee respite, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, O quaff, this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. And quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by the heaven that bends above us, by the God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Now we have Yulalum. Thank you. Thank you. Now we have Yulalum. This piece is considered by many as the greatest of Poe's poems. The vocal music, and I'm quoting, by itself conveys one emotion after another, like the lapping of a river against a shore, steady, quiet, and resistless. The name Eulalume was Poe's creation. No explanation of that word is known. The scholars came up with this, that the most probable meaning of Eulalume is that it combines the Latin verb ulalure, to wail, to cry, with lumen, a light. So it's the light of sorrow, which doesn't make sense because sorrow is dark, joy is light. Again, Poe liked contradictions. It's been said that it must have been composed for recitation because it is quite musical. The story of the poem takes place on Halloween, when the dead have power. Be careful. The protagonist is a man. He's taking a walk through a very strange landscape. And along with him is his soul, who is his sister, Psyche. Psyche is the soul. The man represents reason. Psyche represents intuition, the female side of him. As dawn approaches, they see Venus, planet of love, and the soul distrusts Venus, but she's calmed by the man's reasoning. Until they were stopped, I'm not going to tell you. There's a note here I have that there are possible various meanings for locations that Poe liked to use. He made many of them up, fictitious. In this poem we have a place called Weir and Auber and Mount Yarnick. None have ever been confirmed. They may be fictitious, as I say. The word sear means dried out. And a tarn is a lake. Here it is, Eulalume. The skies, they were ashen and sober. The leaves, they were crisped and sere. The leaves, they were withering and sere. It was a night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year. It was hard by the dim lake of Auber in the misty mid-region of Weir. It was down by the dank tarn of Auber in the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Here once, through an alley titanic of cypress, I roamed with my soul. Of cypress? With Psyche, my soul? These were days when my heart was volcanic, as the scoriac rivers that roll, as the lavas that restlessly roll their sulfurous currents down Yarnick in the ultimate climbs of the pole, that groan as they roll down Mount Yarnick in the realms of the boreal pole. Our talk had been serious and sober, but our thoughts, they were palsied and sere. Our memories were treacherous and sere, for we knew not the month was October, and we marked not the night of the year. Ah, night of all nights in the year. We noted not the dim lake of Auber, though once we had journeyed down here. Remembered not the dark tarn of Auber, nor the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. And now, as the night was senescent and star dials pointed to morn, as the star dials hinted at morn, at the end of our path, a liquescent and nebulous luster was born, out of which a miraculous crescent arose with a duplicate horn, Astarte's bediamonded crescent, distinct with its duplicate horn. Then I said, she is warmer than Dian. She rolls through an ether of sighs. She revels in a region of sighs, with love in her luminous eyes. But Psyche, uplifting her finger, said sadly, this star I mistrust. Her pallor I strangely mistrust. Oh, hasten. Oh, let us not linger. Oh, fly, let us fly, for we must. In terror she spoke, letting sink her wings until they trailed in the dust. In agony, sobbed, letting sink her plumes till they trailed in the dust, till they sorrowfully trailed in the dust. I replied, this is nothing but dreaming. Let us on by this tremulous light. Let us bathe in this crystalline light. Its Sibyllic splendor is beaming with hope and in beauty tonight. See, it flickers up the sky through the night. Ah, we safely may trust to its gleaming and be sure it will lead us aright. We safely may trust to a gleaming that cannot but guide us aright, since it flickers up to heaven through the night. Thus I pacified Psyche and kissed her and tempted her out of her gloom and conquered her scruples and gloom. And we passed to the end of the vista, but were stopped by the door of a tomb, by the door of a legended tomb. And I said, what is written, sweet sister, on the door of this legended tomb? She replied, Eulalume, Eulalume, 'tis the vault of thy lost Eulalume. Then my heart, it grew ashen and sober as the leaves that were crisped and sere, as the leaves that were withering and sere, and I cried, it was surely October, on this very night of last year that I journeyed down here, that I brought a dread burden down here, on this night of all nights in the year. What demon has tempted me here? Well, I know now this dim lake of Auber, this misty mid-region of Weir. Well, I know now this dank tarn of Auber, this ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Now, after the gloom of Eulalume, we go to a love poem which is entitled To Helen. One of the first poems I read was also to Helen, about Helen of Troy. This is another Helen. This celebrates one of the great romances of literary history, the brief engagement of Poe to Sarah Helen Whitman. It's Poe's best accomplishment in blank verse, a form in which he was never really at ease. Poe first saw Helen Whitman as he was taking a walk with a friend past her house. He didn't meet her. He learned who she was. Helen was a somewhat eccentric poetess herself. Sometime later, she sent him a Valentine poem that she wrote about a raven. Poe replied by sending his early poem to Helen to her. He then composed this new Helen and sent it to her. They met subsequently, and a brief engagement followed. This is one of those poems I said is elaborate, florid language. And P.S., Helen Whitman always wore white in summer, and she did have a rose garden. To Helen, I saw thee once only, years ago. I must not say how many, but not many. It was a July midnight, and from out a full-orbed moon that, like thine own soul soaring, sought a precipitate pathway up through heaven, there fell a silvery, silken veil of light with quietude and sultriness and slumber upon the upturned faces of 1,000 roses that grew in an enchanted garden where no wind dared to stir unless on tiptoe. Fell on the upturned faces of these roses that gave out, in return for the love light, their odorous souls in an ecstatic death. Fell on the upturned faces of these roses that smiled and died in this parterre, enchanted by thee and by the poetry of thy presence. Clad all in white, upon a violet bank, I saw thee half reclining, while the moon fell on the upturned faces of the roses, and on thine own upturned, alas, in sorrow. Was it not fate that on this July midnight, was it not fate whose name is also sorrow, that bade me pause before that garden gate to breathe the incense of those slumbering roses? No footstep stirred, the hated world all slept, save only thee and me. Oh heaven, oh God, how my heart beats in coupling those two words, save only thee and me. I paused, I looked, and in an instant all things disappeared. Bear in mind, this garden was enchanted. The pearly luster of the moon went out. The mossy banks and the meandering paths, the happy flowers and the repining trees were seen no more. The very roses' odors died in the arms of the adoring airs. All expired save thee, save less than thou, save only the divine light in thine eyes, save but the soul in thine uplifted eyes. I saw but them. They were the world to me. I saw but them, saw only them for hours, saw only them until the moon went down. What wild heart histories seemed to lie enwritten upon those crystalline celestial spheres. How dark a woe, yet how sublime a hope. How silently serene a sea of pride, how daring an ambition, yet how deep, how fathomless a capacity for love. But now, at length, dear Dian sank from sight into a western couch of thundercloud. And thou, a ghost amid the entombing trees, didst glide away. Only thine eyes remained. They would not go. They never yet have gone. Lighting my lonely pathway home that night, they have never left me as my hopes have since. They follow me. They lead me through the years. They are my ministers, yet I their slave. Their office is to illumine and enkindle my duty to be saved by their bright light and purified in their electric fire and sanctified in their Elysian fire. They fill my soul with beauty, which is hope, and are far up in heaven the stars I kneel to in the sad, silent watches of my night, while even in the meridian glare of day, I see them still, two sweetly scintillant Venuses unextinguished by the sun. One of the best known and finest poems that are short, this is a short one coming here, is A Dream Within a Dream, which reveals Poe's fascination, if not even an obsession, with the dream state, like the other poem I read, Dreamland. In 1849, Poe wrote, "It is by no means an irrational fancy that in a future existence we shall look upon this present existence as a dream." And then he wrote, "Dreams are more ideal and beautiful than the tumultuous realities of passing years." This poem dramatizes his bewilderment because of all the tragedies in his life. He's bewildered in helplessly watching the little that he holds precious sift away. A dream within a dream. Take this kiss upon the brow, and in parting from you now, this much let me avow: you are not wrong, who deem that my dreams have been a dream. Yet if hope has flown away in a night, or in a day, in a vision, or in none, is it therefore the less gone? All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. I stand amid the shore of a surf-tormented roar, and I hold within my hand grains of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep while I weep, while I weep. Oh God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? Next we have El Dorado. And somebody said, somebody who must have known, this is the noblest of Poe's poems, the most universal and the most intensely personal. It's utterly simple. On the surface, it seems like a light-hearted lyric, the occasion being the California gold rush, El Dorado. Underneath, it is the song of discovery by those who seek the true gold. Beauty, truth, the ideal. In the face of adversity, even death itself, they ride boldly, singing a song. This is our poet himself at his very best. And it's what we would wish to be. Even in defeat, the gallant and the bold find El Dorado. It was written in 1848. This is El Dorado. Gaily bedight, a gallant knight, in sunshine and in shadow, had journeyed long, singing a song in search of El Dorado. But he grew old, this knight so bold, and o'er his heart a shadow fell as he found no spot of ground that looked like El Dorado. And as his strength failed him at length, he met a pilgrim shadow. Shadow, said he, where can it be, this land of El Dorado? Over the mountains of the moon, down the valley of the shadow. Ride, boldly ride, the shade replied, if you seek for El Dorado. And finally, we come to Annabel Lee. This is the sweetest and simplest of Poe's ballads. It's widely recognized as one of the great lyric poems of the English language. Generally, it's regarded as a tribute to the memory of his young wife, Virginia. It's a poem of young love, unconquered and unconquerable. Many other ladies have been thought to be the original Annabel Lee, and as many have claimed that they thought that they were the original Annabel Lee. Some analysts have felt that the work was a conscious effort by Poe to have more than one of his fair lady friends identify with this character personally. But the true subject is not known. It's been said that the rhythm of the poem recalls the ebb and flow of the sea, or even a breaking of waves on the shore. In any event, there is a repeated hypnotic rhythm which supports the feelings. It was written in September of 1849. Poe died in October of 1849, 1 month after this was written. Annabel Lee. It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child, and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love. I and my Annabel Lee with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted, her and me. And this was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life, and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Thank you. This concludes our journey through the life of Edgar Allan Poe, one of the leading voices, as I have said a couple of times already, of the Romantic period of literature in America. There are, of course, many other works for which he is well known, which would have run out of space, out of time. So after all the downers that we have shared here, I'd just like to close with some of Poe's one-liners, showing that he actually did have a sense of humor. For instance, stupidity is a talent for misconception. Perversity is the human thirst for self-torture. And I became insane with long intervals of sanity. And to die laughing must be the glorious of all glorious deaths. And I remained too much in my head. Ended up losing my mind. If you're ever drowned or hung, be sure to make a note of the sensations. And finally, one little tiny line of optimism. Even in the grave, all is not lost. Thank you.